Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, greetings, wherever and whenever you're viewing this video. As you know, I couldn't be with you on the lecture, so I'm coming to you via streaming through eCampus. What I'd like you to do right now is to go into eCampus and open up the Week 1 folder. Put me on pause if you need to. Open up the Week 1 folder, and I want you to download a PowerPoint presentation that's entitled The Segmented Society. If you go ahead and download that, you'll be able to follow along with me as I give this lecture. So go ahead, put me on pause, and download that lecture right now. Okay, now if we were to have this lecture in the lecture hall, typically what I do is I write a series of terms on the board, and these are going to be your term bank. And the reason that these terms are important is these are the key words, the key issues, the key events, the key ideas that I need you to have some familiarity with. You have to have a general idea of what they are and how they fit into the context of our class. Now, I've sent all of you an email that has listed these terms. When you hear one of these terms, you need to jot down its significance and how it's fitting into our class. The nice part about having me on video is that you can put me on pause, you can rewind me if you didn't catch the entirety of whatever it was that I was talking about. Now, referring to your terms, let's go ahead and open up with our discussion. This lecture is entitled The Segmented Society, and you'll find out why historians call America in the late 19th century a segmented society. But what I'd like you to understand first of all is I'm referring to a time period that's generally speaking in the aftermath of the Civil War. So let's just call it 1865 through the 1880s. I know that we were really specific when it comes to the start date of this class in 1877, but just for logistical reasons, I want you to just kind of call it something generic like the late 19th century or the late 1800s. Most historians refer to America in the late 1800s as a collection of island communities. Now, I'm hopeful that you can see that that is one of your terms, so this is an important thing to wrap your mind around. Now, what they mean by island communities are small towns, and these towns are fully functioning municipalities. And what we mean by that is everything that you need in order to survive is right there within that town. Your butcher, your grocery store, your dry cleaner, anything that you can imagine having to do with your automobile or how you get back and forth to work, everything that you can possibly imagine that you need on a day-to-day basis is housed right there in that local municipality. As you might imagine, this is quite different than the world in which we live today. My guess is many of you depend on not only different towns, but also different states. In most instances, many of us depend on other countries in order to just get through a 24-hour cycle. So understand that this is a very different world that we're talking about. But this was the general consensus in America. We were a collection of these island communities. Now, if you think about an island for a second, what it is it's isolated, right? What we mean by island communities is these small towns didn't have a whole lot of contact with one another. I'm not saying that they never spoke of each other, didn't know each other existed. I'm simply saying that there really wasn't a need for somebody in Dallas, for instance, to go to Fort Worth for any real reason. Hence the term island communities. Now, the general radius of one of these island communities was about 6 miles. So you've got a radius of about 6 miles, and that was for a very specific reason. The reason being is 6 miles is approximately how far one horse could travel in a day's time. So once again, you have to understand that these things are laid out for very, very specific purposes. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about the character of these island communities. When it comes to work, many of you probably have jobs, and when you go to your job, you have a very, very, very specific role. Think about the guy that takes your money and gives you a ticket at Cinemark or AMC or the local movie theater. His or her job is to simply dole out the tickets and collect the money. Somebody else gets you your popcorn. Somebody else takes your ticket and directs you what theater to go to view the movie. We have very specified roles when we get to work. People in the late 19th century didn't operate that way. When you went to a blacksmith, this blacksmith was a metal worker in the traditional sense, but he could also fix your bike for you, your bicycle. He was also the guy that could fix a gear, or he was basically a know-it-all mechanic. And that applied to people across the gamut in American life. Once again, we've got a very specified regiment in American life. I mean, look no further than our hospitals. If you get sick, a lot of times you'll see 3 different specialists all in the same hospital. A doctor back in the late 19th century wasn't a doctor like what we would think of today. A lot of times he, and I emphasize the word he, never went to medical school. He was just a guy that was pretty good at doing things like patching up wounds or sewing up scrapes or things of that sort. He was a guy that had a strong stomach and didn't faint at the sight of blood. Anyway, what I'd like you to understand about these small independent municipalities was the idea of work was a lot broader than it is in our society in this day and age. Now, think about the last time that you went grocery shopping. My guess is it was someplace like a Super Target, a Walmart, Kroger, something along those lines. Think about the toothpaste aisle alone in Kroger. There's a multitude of brands. There's an absolute sea. I mean, first of all, the toothpaste aisle is literally an aisle. You could spend 4 or 5 hours there, just noting the variations in different brands alone. And then, of course, you've got various specialties that these toothpaste companies claim to bring to the table when it comes to why you should buy their products. You didn't have a Kroger back in the late 19th century. What you had was a general store. And what they sold you at the general store was the stuff that you needed to provide for yourself for about a month in advance. I mean, think about that. How many of you would buy groceries 1 month out? In other words, it would have to last you from January all the way into February. Very, very few of us. But when it comes to variety, there basically wasn't any. I just used the example of toothpaste, but you could make the same case for the cookie aisle at Kroger. There's a lot of different cookies and all kinds of different specialties within those variations. Anyway, the cookie didn't really exist in the general store. Cookies were more like biscuits, and they were meant to get you through a 24, 48-hour cycle where a household might be, cut off from town via blizzard or flood or something along those lines. My point is, these general stores, you knew the people that you were doing business with. And although there wasn't a whole lot of diversity of choice when it comes to the products that you were consuming, you could count on the quality of that meat, for instance, that you were buying. Many of you may recall a few years ago there was a food scare, especially for pet food. A lot of the food that we fed our dogs and cats had been poisoned unintentionally with lead and other chemicals that made a lot of dogs and cats sick, and many of them died. Nobody worried about that in the late 19th century, primarily because they knew the person that sold them their pork chops. And not only did they know the family that sold that to them, they knew the pig in which the pork chops came from. I don't mean to be too grotesque, but then again, you are reading The Jungle. You knew the family, you knew what they were like, you knew the kind of products, including the kind of pork that they raised. So nobody worried about those sorts of things. So it really is a give-and-take relationship when it comes to would you rather live then or would you rather live now. Now, one of the most important parts of society in any time period is what you do when you're not working. What I'm talking about, of course, is leisure. Now, once again, we've got very, very, very specific hobbies, specific pastimes, and specific things that we like to do when we're not on the clock, so to speak. This would have also been unrecognizable to the late 19th century American. Generally speaking, leisure was something that you did as a collection, as a community whole. It was something that you did through your church. It was something that you did through your town or perhaps even your neighborhood. But a lot of times what leisure involved was a medicine show. Some guy said that he had a cure for whooping cough, and he would put on a show for you. He would put on a demonstration, and everybody would come out and watch this demonstration, and then you'd talk about it for an hour or two afterwards. It was a form of entertainment. I think if you had to put it in our society today, what you would call that is an infomercial. And I doubt very seriously if there's many of you out there that really like watching infomercials. Anyway, my point is, by our standards, this is a very rough life. There's very little specialization, there's very little diversity, and generally speaking, I think we would define, as moderns anyway, we would define this as a low standard of living. However, you have to understand that these people didn't realize that they were missing out on anything, primarily because this was all that they had ever known. What I want to do now is I want to transition into another section. This section is about to end, and I want you to click on the next link and go ahead, and we're going to talk about the culture, the values, and the norms in the late 19th century.